Marcus Jenkins had spent 22 years making sure he was never late. Not to formations, not to briefings, not to the moments that mattered. So on the morning of his son's college graduation, he was up before the sun. He ironed his slacks twice, polished his shoes until he could see his own face in them, stood in front of the bathroom mirror and straightened his tie the way his drill sergeant had taught him back at Fort Benning. Firm pull, clean knot, no excuses. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He hadn't worn it in public since the day he retired, but he carried himself like a man who had earned every inch of the ground beneath his feet. His son Dion was the first person in 3 generations of Jenkins men to finish college. First one to walk across a stage for something other than a deployment send-off. Marcus had worked double shifts at the freight warehouse for 4 years straight to make sure that happened. No complaints, no shortcuts. That was just what fathers did. He drove 3 hours from Clarksville, Tennessee, with a bouquet of white roses on the passenger seat and a handwritten card in the glove compartment that had taken him 6 drafts to get right. He pulled into the university parking lot 40 minutes early, found a spot near the main entrance, checked his reflection one more time in the rearview mirror, and stepped out into the warm Georgia morning. The campus was already alive. Families streaming in from every direction. Mothers in sundresses carrying balloons, fathers in polo shirts with cameras hanging from their necks, little siblings running ahead on the sidewalk. It was the kind of scene that made a man feel like the world was exactly the size it was supposed to be. Marcus tucked the bouquet under his arm, locked the car, and joined the flow of people moving toward the gymnasium. He had the printed invitation in his breast pocket. He had his driver's license. He had his VA identification card. He had everything a man was supposed to have. He hadn't thought for a single second that any of it would matter in the way it was about to. The line at the entrance moved steadily. Marcus watched families pass through the glass doors one after another. Ticket checked, smile exchanged, no friction. He counted maybe 30 people ahead of him, then 20, then 10. He straightened his jacket one last time and stepped up to the table where 2 security guards were stationed. The first guard was young, maybe mid-20s, pink-faced and thick-necked, with the kind of posture that told you he had never once been told no in a way that stuck. He looked at Marcus the way some men look at something they've already decided doesn't belong. Not with anger, exactly, but with that particular flatness that is somehow worse than anger. The second guard stood slightly behind and to the right, arms crossed, saying nothing, which would later turn out to be its own kind of statement. "Sir," the first guard said. Not a greeting, a checkpoint. Marcus handed over his invitation. The guard looked at it for longer than necessary, turned it over, looked at it again. "I'm going to need additional identification." Marcus didn't flinch. He'd been asked for his papers in various forms his entire life. He reached into his pocket and produced his driver's license without a word. The guard took it, studied it, handed it back. "Do you have anything else?" Marcus pulled out his VA card. The guard glanced at it and handed it back almost immediately, like it barely registered. "We're going to need you to step aside, sir. There's a verification issue with your ticket." Marcus looked at the ticket in the guard's hand. It had his name on it. It had the date on it. It had the university seal printed in the upper right corner. He had received it by email 3 weeks earlier, printed it on the good paper at the FedEx on Broad Street, and kept it in a plastic sleeve in his desk drawer until this morning. "What kind of verification issue?" he asked. His voice was level. It had taken him years to build a voice that stayed level. "It's a system thing," the guard said. "Just step aside and we'll get it sorted. My son is graduating in 40 minutes. Sir, I need you to step aside." The people behind Marcus kept moving. The line kept flowing. He watched a white family of 5 pass through without so much as a second glance from either guard, the father laughing at something on his phone as he walked by. Marcus noted it, stored it, said nothing. He stepped to the side. He waited 15 minutes. No one came to verify anything. The second guard had disappeared. The first guard was processing the end of the line, not looking in Marcus's direction. When Marcus approached him again and asked what was happening, the guard told him there was still a problem with the system and that he might need to wait outside until after the ceremony began. Outside, until after the ceremony began. Marcus had slept in the dirt in Fallujah. He had carried a man twice his size through a firefight in Kandahar with a bullet fragment in his left shoulder. He had buried his mother from a FOB in Iraq because he couldn't get emergency leave approved in time. He had done all of those things without letting his voice crack. But standing outside that gymnasium in his pressed slacks and his polished shoes, holding a bouquet of white roses for his son, who was somewhere inside that building about to walk across the most important stage of his life, something in Marcus Jenkins went very, very quiet. And quiet, for a man like Marcus, was not the same thing as calm. He took out his phone, called Dion. No answer. The boy was probably already lined up with his class, gown on, cap straight, looking for his father's face in the crowd and not finding it. Marcus left a voicemail, kept his voice even, said he was outside, said there was a delay, said not to worry. Then he sat down on a concrete bench near the entrance and looked at the roses in his lap and thought about the 6 drafts of the card in his glove compartment, thought about the freight warehouse and the double shifts and the 4 years of not complaining, thought about a 6-year-old boy holding a flashlight like a weapon, proud of his father in a way that only children can be proud, completely, without conditions, without knowing yet that the world does not always honor what deserves to be honored. He was still sitting there when the group came around the corner. There were 7 of them. They came around the side of the building in civilian clothes, khakis, button-downs, one in a plain gray t-shirt. But Marcus clocked them before they were 20 feet away. You don't spend 2 decades around Rangers without learning how they move. There is something in the stride, something in the way they hold their shoulders and scanned a space without appearing to scan it. These were not men who wandered. These were men who arrived. The one in front was tall and broad through the chest, with close-cropped gray at his temples and the kind of jawline that looked like it had been set in concrete sometime around his 3rd deployment and never relaxed since. His name, Marcus would later learn, was First Sergeant Calvin Reeves, retired. Same as Marcus, though Reeves had put in 26 years to Marcus's 22. Behind him came men of varying ages, varying builds, all carrying the same invisible weight that combat veterans carry into every room they enter for the rest of their lives. 2 of them Marcus vaguely recognized from the 75th Ranger Regiment's alumni network. One of them had a graduation bouquet of his own tucked under his arm, yellow flowers, slightly crushed, like he'd been holding them too tight. They were there for the same reason Marcus was. Their kids, their grandkids, their nephews were inside that building. They had driven hours. Some had flown. This was their morning too. Reeves spotted Marcus on the bench before Marcus had fully registered the group. Something passed across the older man's face. Not pity. Nothing close to pity. More like the particular recognition that happens between men who have seen the same things in the same dark places and never quite left them behind. He changed course without breaking stride and came directly to where Marcus was sitting. "Brother," Reeves said. Not a question, not a greeting exactly, just an acknowledgement. The word that meant, "I see you, I know what you are, and I am not walking past you." Marcus stood. They shook hands the way veterans shake hands, full grip, eye contact, no performance. "They tell you there's a problem with your ticket?" Reeves asked. Marcus looked at him. "You too." Reeves didn't answer that directly. He just turned and looked at the entrance for a moment, at the 2 guards still stationed at the table, and then he looked back at Marcus with an expression that had gone very still and very deliberate. The other men had gathered loosely around them by now. Nobody was talking loudly. Nobody was making a scene. But there was a quality to the silence that had weight to it. "How long they had you out here?" Reeves asked. "Going on 25 minutes. Reeves nodded slowly. He reached into the chest pocket of his button-down and produced his own invitation, printed on the same good paper, same university seal, same format. Then he looked at the man with the yellow flowers, who produced his. Then the next man. And the next. 7 invitations, held loosely, none of them asked for, all of them ready. "Let's go inside," Reeves said. Quiet, absolute. What happened next was not a confrontation in any cinematic sense. There were no raised voices. No one got in anyone's face. No speeches were made on that sidewalk. Marcus Jenkins and Calvin Reeves and 5 other United States Army Rangers, retired, decorated, and collectively carrying more combat experience than the entire security staff of that university had years on this earth, simply walked to the entrance together, side by side. 7 men in civilian clothes moving with a collective stillness that had its own kind of volume. The first guard saw them coming. Something shifted in his posture. The second guard, who had reappeared from wherever he had been, looked at the approaching group and then looked at his colleague in a way that communicated very clearly that whatever this was, he had not signed up for it. Reeves reached the table first, set his invitation down, said nothing. The guard looked at it, looked at Reeves, looked at the 6 men behind him, looked at Marcus. "Sir, is there a problem with this invitation?" Reeves asked, still quiet, still absolute. A pause. "No, sir." "And this one?" The man with the yellow flowers set his down. "No, sir." One by one, each man placed his invitation on the table. Each time, the answer was the same. "No, sir. No, sir. No, sir." And then Marcus stepped forward and placed his invitation down last, and the guard looked at it for exactly 1 second and said, without meeting his eyes, "You're clear to go in." They walked through the doors together. Inside, the gymnasium was packed and loud and bright with the particular joy of 1,000 families reunited around the same moment. Balloons drifted near the ceiling. A brass ensemble was playing something triumphant near the stage. Rows of graduates in blue gowns were filing in from the left side of the floor, and the crowd was already on its feet, phones raised, craning for the first glimpse of their person. Marcus found a seat in the 4th row with a clean sight line to the stage. Reeves and 2 of the others sat near him. The rest spread out through the rows, finding their own families, settling in. One of them, the man who had the yellow flowers, clapped Marcus once on the shoulder as he passed, firmly, without a word, and kept walking. The ceremony began. Marcus watched every second of it. He watched the dean speak. He watched the faculty process in their academic regalia. He watched the student speaker, a young woman from Atlanta who talked about resilience in a way that made half the room reach for tissues. He watched the rows of graduates and tracked the alphabetical logic of the procession, calculating roughly where Dion would appear in the sequence, which letter would bring him to the edge of that stage. When they called the J's, Marcus sat forward. Jerome, Jimenez, Johnson. 2 Johnsons, Jones, and then Dion Marcus Jenkins, Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering. Summa cum laude. Summa cum laude. Marcus had not known about the summa cum laude. Dion had not told him, probably trying to let it be a surprise, probably imagining the exact expression that was now on his father's face, the kind of expression that a man spends most of his life making sure no one ever sees, open, unguarded, trembling slightly at the edges. Dion walked across the stage and shook the dean's hand and accepted his diploma and turned to find his father's face in the crowd. It took him 3 seconds. Then he found it. He raised his diploma in the air like a torch. Marcus stood up, started clapping. Around him, Reeves and the others stood too, without being asked, without discussion, all of them on their feet for a young man none of them had ever met, clapping for a moment that had almost been stolen from the man beside them and wasn't. The applause in that section was louder than anywhere else in the gymnasium. Dion would later say that when he heard it, when he saw that cluster of strangers rising together for him, he almost missed his step coming off the stage. He didn't know who they were yet. He didn't know what had happened outside. He just knew that something about the moment felt larger than it should have, charged with something he couldn't name, and that his father was standing in the middle of it with white roses in his hands and the look on his face that Dion had never seen before and would never forget. After the ceremony, in the courtyard outside, the story came out in pieces. Dion stood with his diploma and his gown still on while his father told him, calmly, without anger, what had happened at the entrance. Reeves was nearby and filled in a few details. The other men drifted over one by one as families gathered around them and photographs were taken, and the afternoon light turned golden over the campus. Dion listened to all of it without speaking. He was 22 years old and had grown up watching his father absorb things quietly and stand back up, and he had always admired it in the abstract way that children admire their parents before they are old enough to understand exactly what it costs. Now he was old enough. He stood there in the golden light with his diploma in his hand and understood, maybe for the first time, what 22 years of that kind of discipline actually looked like from the inside. He looked at his father for a long moment. Then he said the only thing there was to say. "I'm glad you were there, Dad." Marcus Jenkins looked at his son, first-generation college graduate, engineer, summa cum laude, 22 years old and already carrying himself like someone who knew what he was worth, and said, "I wasn't going to miss it." The photographs from that afternoon tell a particular kind of story. There's one that Dion took on his phone. His father standing with Calvin Reeves and the other 5 men in the courtyard, all of them in their civilian clothes, none of them performing anything, just standing together in the way that men stand when they have been through things that don't require explanation. Marcus is in the center. He is holding the white roses. He is not smiling exactly, but there is something in his face that is better than a smile. It is the face of a man who has been reminded of something he already knew but needed to feel again. That dignity, once built, cannot be taken at a door. Dion posted that photograph that night with a caption that was 3 sentences long. By morning it had been shared 40,000 times. By the end of the week, the number was something no one in the Jenkins family had a frame of reference for. The university issued a statement. The security company that employed the 2 guards issued a statement. Both statements used the word regret in ways that stopped short of the word wrong, which told you everything you needed to know about the difference between institutions managing optics and human beings reckoning with themselves. Marcus did not respond to either statement publicly. He had never needed an institution to confirm what he already knew about himself, and he was not about to start. The 2 guards were let go within 72 hours. Marcus, when asked about it in the single interview he agreed to give, a local Clarksville news segment, 8 minutes, recorded in his living room, said that he hoped they found work and that he hoped they thought about it. That was all he said on the subject. Some people found that too forgiving. Marcus didn't think of it as forgiveness exactly. He thought of it as refusing to let their worst moment define the architecture of his best one, because that was what that day was, finally. His best one. Not because of what happened at the door. Not because of Reeves and the others, though he would carry that with him the rest of his life. The sight of 7 men adjusting course without being asked, moving toward something that needed to be stood beside. Not even because of the photograph or the shares or the statement from the university president that arrived by email 4 days later. It was his best day because of a 22-year-old in a blue gown raising a diploma like a torch and finding his father's face in a crowd. Everything else was noise. That was the signal. Marcus Jenkins had deployed to 2 wars. He had been shot at and had shot back. He had held dying men and written letters to their families and carried grief in his body like cargo for decades. He had raised a son alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Clarksville on a freight worker's salary and had told that son, every single day in word and in example, that the world would not always be fair and that fairness was not the point, that the point was what you chose to be inside of whatever the world handed you. Dion had listened. Dion had become. And on the afternoon of his graduation, surrounded by strangers who stood up without being asked, in a courtyard full of golden light and the noise of 1,000 families celebrating the people they loved, Marcus Jenkins sat on a bench with white roses in his lap and understood that 22 years of choices had arrived somewhere worth arriving. He was not a man who cried easily. The army had not encouraged it and life had not required it, and he had developed, over time, a particular internal architecture that kept things ordered and contained. But in the car on the drive home that night alone, Dion following behind in his own car back to the apartment for dinner, Marcus let 3 miles of Tennessee highway pass in a blur and did not fight it. He had earned that too.